Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. At that time, you can press star 1 to ask a question from the phone lines. I'd also like to inform the parties that today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I'd now like to turn the call over to David Radznowski, NASA's Chief Financial
here with you all. What I'd like to do today is walk through the budget summary that has been placed on our website. It's 24 primary pages long. I am not going to read through them. You have them. As I walk through the presentation, I'll let you know what chart I'm on, and I will try to hit the key highlights on each of these pages and provide the key information for you. At the end, we'll definitely open it up to questions that you may have on these documents or other documents that you have seen that you have questions about. The first page 2, if we can go to that, please. It shifted to page 2. Just so everyone knows, pages 2 through 5 are bullets that describe the 2016 budget highlights. I'm not going to read these verbatim. There's a couple of top budget points I would like to just lay out here instead of reading these charts. First of all, we NASA, as Administrator Bolden had said earlier this afternoon, this is a strong budget. It does provide a constancy of purpose. From my perspective, there are limited surprises in this budget. We have seen this budget before in many ways, except that it's a higher number. The message that we take from this is the administration is continuing to support the plan that we have been following. They agree with our direction, and our request, which is $18.5 billion, continues with our direction. These investments that we have put forth today have put NASA firmly on a journey to Mars. Building on the tremendous progress made this year, the budget enables further development of the Orion multi-purpose crew vehicle, the Space Launch System, and Exploration Ground Systems to send astronauts on deep space exploration missions. The budget supports the administration's commitment for NASA to be a catalyst for the growth of a vibrant American commercial space industry and regain the capability to send astronauts into space cost-effectively and safely from American soil by the end of 2017. The administration is committed to extending operation of the International Space Station to at least 2024, providing a unique environment for research on human health and space operations that will be necessary for long-term future human missions, and for also expanding commercial activity in low Earth orbit. The budget funds a robust $5.29 billion for the science program, including funding for the James Webb Space Telescope, increased support for Earth science, and funding for missions to Mars, Europa, and other destinations throughout the solar system. Finally, the key top budget point I would like to lay out is this budget does support continued progress in the development of transformative capabilities and cutting-edge technologies for aeronautics and space, which provide the spin-offs and feed the economy. This work is part of the administration's overall vital strategy to equip our nation with technologies for the future. So these are highlights and high budget points I would just like to lay out. If we would skip the ARM robotic mission segment for space technology, the plan would fund 6 major in-space demonstrations. The overall plan for 16 will launch 13 science and cargo missions and 1 commercial crew test. The funding will integrate the James Webb Space Telescope mirror with the scientific instruments into one entity. In addition, for aeronautics, we'll complete the capstone unmanned aerial vehicle system flight demonstration to deliver 5 years of results. This will help enable FAA to develop regulations on integration of UAVs into the airspace system. Next chart, which is chart 7. Now, this is a chart I'm a little more comfortable with, as in it's got numbers. Couple of things I would like to note on page 7 on the budget table. Actual appropriations language as we develop our FY2015 operating plan and get that approved by Congress. Those funding levels we're reflecting a 1.5% annual increase in over the next 5 years. This chart, again, as I noted, assumes 14 launches in FY2016, which includes 13 science which is page 9. This is titled Earth Science. And now I'm going to go into a little more details on the specific areas specific to lights. And a little more detail related to that is the 16 budget proposal administration commitment to a multi-decade sustainable land imaging program. This means that we will immediately initiate at 9 is launched in the 2023 timeframe to help to ensure data continuity. Finally, the plan does include funding for technology and innovation work, with the idea that technology and innovation would go into future landscapes is $1.361 billion. This is higher than the projection in the 15 budget request for FY2016. continuation of the development funding for a Mars 2020 mission. The request in terms of the funding level in 2016 for opportunity and the 2017 funding for assumes that it ceases operations. We will assess ongoing opportunity operations this summer in 2016 and potentially identify funds for the potential continuation of operations for astrophysics. The request for astrophysics is $709 million. Within this request, Sophia is fully funded. Operations of Sophia at $85.2 million. Here is that funding for phase A-B would be funded in the out years, and that we would make a decision no earlier than 2017 whether to initiate formulation of this next decadal astrophysics strategy mission. Are we $2016 is $620 million. As I noted earlier, the funding will help integrate the web mirror with the science instruments in 2016. However, with our $620 million request, we are still on schedule for an October 2018 launch. Initiative, which was the highest priority of the 2013 enacted. If you all remembered, Congress ultimately appropriated $99 million above the administration's request for aeronautics in 2015. To future out-year funding. These will be one-time activities that we identify using FY2016 to future out-year funding. These will be one-time activities that we identify using FY2015 funds. Moving on to page 15. This is space technology. The request for space technology is $725 million. This is a $129 million increase over FY2015. It's a 22% increase that reflects the administration's strong commitment to space technology. Items to note within space technology, these increases will fund a laser communication demonstration in 2019. The request in 2016 FY2016 for that activity is 50. Request is an increase. Our funding for SBIR for FY15. One other item the plan is implementable in the short term based on our current budgets. And it assumes in the out years that we will get increases commensurate with economic growth. And when we are thinking about next step in terms of our journey to Mars, to ensure that what we do on the next step is linked as well as maybe extensible to future missions. We want to implement our journey to Mars in a very, very cost-effective way. So formulation, moving towards formulation with the $16 we will be supporting early concept development for the robotic mission. The options before us and making sure that each of the option or ultimately option that we do access is extensible to the future. We are still planning to have a mission concept review. The latest I've heard of that is it will no longer take place in February, but we are looking at maybe late March for a mission concept review. We can identify that with the Human Exploration Office at some point. So the key summary I would like to say here is we are still in pre-formulation, moving towards formulation. 16 supports early concept development for the mission. And based on the profile that we've laid out and the notional out years assumption for the overall initiative, we would look for a robotic launch in the 2020-2021 timeframe, and a crew visit is successful in getting an asteroid around lunar orbit, a crew visit in the mid-2020s. Next chart, chart 18, exploration systems development. Our request for exploration systems development is $2.863 billion. The request is consistent with past requests. So if you look at the FY2015 budget and look at the FY2016 column in that FY2015 budget, our request is exactly the same that we had proposed in FY2015. What this means for the three components in FY2016 is the request for SLS is $1.357 billion. The request for Orion is $1.096 billion. And the request for exploration ground systems is $410 million. These funding levels meet our external commitment to have SLS and ground systems ready for a potential EM launch in November of 2018. That's not saying that's when EM launch will take place. That means that SLS and Orion, we have committed, based on this funding level, to be ready by November 2018. To help set our commitment to an EM1 date, which we don't have a commitment to yet, we still have to complete our Orion KDPC activity, which is currently scheduled to be completed in spring of this year. And once we have Orion KDPC and we have completed critical design review of all three legs, SLS, Orion, and exploration ground systems, we will make a commitment to an EM1 launch date. Moving on to next page, page 19, commercial spaceflight. The request for commercial spaceflight is $1.244 billion. This funding level and request is based on the two fixed price contracts that we have with SpaceX and with Boeing. The milestones that they have laid out in 2015 and 2016 for those contracts result in a $1.244 billion request. Essentially, what I'm trying to emphasize is the milestones that we have in the contracts we have in plane. If those two companies meet those milestones, we require $1.244 billion in FY2016. Based on this funding level and those companies meeting their milestones, it would support certification of commercial of commercial crew services by the end of 2017, meeting all of the NASA safety requirements. Two providers help provide that resiliency and ensure that we will have a capability that meets NASA's safety requirements. You will note that the out-year funding level for commercial spaceflight do decrease. The request that we laid out for commercial spaceflight is for the development portion of those contracts. It essentially funds the development milestones as well as 2 test flights for both companies. Those contracts also assume the option of providing services to space station, actual commercial services for space station, if they met the certification requirements. Funding for those actual commercial crew services is provided in the space station program within the space station cargo and crew line. So that is why the dollar ramps down here. The dollars for commercial space flight are only for development and 2 test flights each. Funding for commercial crew services is provided in the space station cargo and crew services budget line. Next chart, page 20. Exploration Research Development. The request for Exploration Research Development is $399 million. This breaks out $168 million for the Human Research Program and $231 million for Advanced Exploration Systems activities. We do see an increase in both of these activities. For Human Research Program, a lot of the increase goes towards continued work on countermeasures for humans in space. And the $231 million for AES continues funding for future projects to support future exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit. In addition, does assume funding for ARM robotic mission concept development. Moving on to chart 21, International Space Station. The request for International Space Station is $3.106 billion. This provides funding for space station operations, space station research, and space station cargo and crew services. There are increases requested for space station research and cargo crew services, commensurate with our intent to increase utilization of the International Space Station, as well as meet our commitments for cargo missions and future commercial crew and near-term Soyuz crew services. I will note within the International Space Station line for ISS research, there is $55 million requested for in-space robotic servicing. I didn't note it earlier, but there's also an additional $10 million requested in the Space Technology Mission Directorate, bringing our total FY2016 request for in-space robotic servicing to $65 million. Moving to the next chart, Space and Flight Support, chart 22. The request for space and flight support is $898 million. This is an increase above the FY enacted level. A significant portion of the increase is going towards the Space Network Ground Segment Sustainment Project to modernize our aging space network. We recently have identified cost and schedule challenges within the Space Network Ground Segment Sustainment Project, and our $160.7 million request for SGSS and FY2016 supports a rebaseline program. Now, the agency hasn't fully committed to that rebaseline program at this point in time yet. Later this spring, early summer, we will be conducting an agency-level review to approve that rebaseline. And based on the current thinking, that SGSS rebaseline is $160.7 million in FY16. Also, Space and Flight Support does assume an FY16 request for 21st Century Spaceport of $23.3 million. Moving to the next chart, education. Education on page 23 is funded in FY16 at $89 million. This is a $30.1 million reduction to from FY15 enacted. Breakout within education assumes the 16 request of $24 million for space grant, $9 million for EPSCoR, $30 million for MUREP, and $26 million for STEM education and accountability projects. As I noted earlier, there is $20 million within the astrophysics funding line for SMD education outreach activities, and I neglected to note earlier within this Earth Science budget line, there is $6 million for GLOBE activities funded within Earth Science. Moving to the final page before I open up the questions, page 24, Safety, Security, and Mission Services and Construction. The request for Safety, Security, and Mission Services in 2016 is $2.843 billion. This account was formerly known as Cross-Agency Support. This fully funds our activities for operations at NASA centers and provides independent technical and safety oversight of our missions. I will note that within our overall FY16 request, we do assume a reduction to NASA's total FTE level. Our FY15 supported level is 17,400 FTEs. Our FY16 request level assumes FTE level of 17,200. That equates to a 200 FTE reduction. The majority of those FTE reductions are found actually in the programs within the Space Technology Mission Directorate and with the Human Exploration Activity. The assumption is 69 million of those FTE reductions come directly out of space technology, and 120 million of those FTE reductions come out of HEO, with only 12 of those FTE reductions supported within Safety, Security, and Mission Services. Finally, request for construction and environmental compliance and remediation. The request is $465 million. Within that request, there is a $94 million request for a construction project known as the Langley Research Center Measurement Science Laboratory. And that is full funding for construction of that project in FY16. And there's no additional funding for that requested for that project in the out years. It's a one-time funding request for construction of that full facility. And with that, I'd actually like to open it up to questions that you may have about anything I've gone over or any other items that are in our congressional justifications. And I will attempt to answer them or provide them for the record and get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
If you would like to ask a question from the phone lines, please press *1. You will be prompted to unmute your phone and record your name. Again, that's *1. One moment, please, for the first question. Seth Borenstein with Associated Press. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you. I guess, David, what I'm looking for, you read through all the numbers here. what I'm looking for is the mission and total mission cost numbers. Do you have a total mission cost number for asteroid redirect mission yet? And is there a difference between option A and option B in terms of price, and what is that difference? And for that matter, what are the estimates for total mission cost for Europa, Mars 2020, and the ever-expanding Webb telescope costs? Thank you.
Okay, I actually don't have all those handy. Of course, we actually don't have a committed full funding level for the full-up asteroid redirect mission. As I noted, we still haven't gone to mission concept review. We still haven't selected a design or an option. Yes, there would likely be some differences in terms of whatever option that we went for, but I don't have a breakout for you at this point in time on what those differences might be.
Which one's more expensive?
I actually do not have that in front of me right now. I don't know.
And in terms of Europa, Mars, Webb?
Europa, of course, is in formulation, and so we actually do not have a design yet or instrument selection yet, so we cannot identify the cost of the Europa mission. All I can say at this point in time is this is why we go through the formulation activities to identify what are the science requirements that we need to meet, and based on those requirements, how can we meet those in the most cost-effective manner possible. So I do not have a Europa number at this point in time, and we won't until we move towards what is known as Key Decision Point C, when the agency actually makes a commitment to Europa mission. For Webb, I do have that because we do have a commitment, an external commitment for a launch in 2018. The development cost estimate, and this is actually on page MP3 of your FY15 congressional justification, FY16 congressional justification. The Webb number is, let's see if I get this right number, $1.198 billion is the commitment for development. And you mentioned Mars 2020. We don't actually have a commitment to a total funding yet for the Mars 2020 because we have not reached KDPC. Once we reach Mars 2020 KDPC, we will give you a total mission profile and commitment for that. Does that help you at all? I know it doesn't fully answer your questions that you had. The thing I would point out is, within formulation, we do have rough estimates of how much we have in any given year, but we do not at that point in time identify the total cost of a mission until we have done our preliminary design review and have met the agency KTPC. And this is to make sure that we are managing our projects wisely and ensuring that when we commit to you, to Congress, to the administration, a cost and a schedule, we do so with some level of confidence. Did I get all the things you wanted?
Hey, Dave Razanowski, it's David Weaver. Just one other thing on Seth's question related to the asteroid redirect mission. I think you covered this in your prepared remarks, but we do have $220 million in the recommended budget for the asteroid initiative, which includes ARM. And Seth, as you know, we're already on record saying that we estimate that the mission would be about half of what the Keck study estimated, approximately $1.25 billion plus launch vehicle.
Eric Berger, Houston Chronicle, your line is open.
Hi, good afternoon, David. Thanks for taking the time to do this. Just a couple questions. I want to ask four like Seth did. What is how much money has been spent on ARM to date, or ARM-related activities prior to the $220 million that you're seeking for the coming fiscal year? And second of all, the $1.24 billion number for commercial crew. If you get less than that, does that mean that you won't have money to fulfill the contracts for SpaceX and Boeing, or if a number comes in less for that, sort of how do you handle that?
Okay, for ARM, and it's not ARM, it's the overall asteroid initiative. The total that we have in FY2014, approximately $128 million. Now, we're only into FY2015 because I can't identify how much in FY2015 for ARM and asteroid initiative related activities. Our request was $180 million in 2015. Ultimately, what we spend in 2015, we're in the process of identifying what we will actually spend in 2015. It will be less than that $180 million request. How much less I can't identify at this point in time. We're still in the process of identifying our plan for 2015. Okay, so that's asteroid initiative and ARM. The second item again, commercial crew. If we do not get the full request, if both SpaceX and Boeing do not stay on their milestone schedule that's laid out, if they do, and we do not get the funding we need in 2016, we will have to go back to both companies and negotiate with them change in their milestones, because we can't support all the milestones that's laid out for 2016. And therefore, as a result, we cannot then no longer commit to having certified services by the end of 2017. That's the outcome of lower dollars in 2016 for commercial crew. Depending on what the level was, I can't tell what milestones would have to go, but again, I wanted to reiterate, and I reiterated a couple times in my presentation, the request does reflect what's in those contracts and achievement of the schedule that they've laid out for their milestones. If they achieve them, we need that full $1.244 billion.
Mike Wall, Space.com, your line is open.
Okay, thanks, guys. Yeah, this is just a quick question actually about, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. That's the one that sort of jumped out at me. I mean, you talked about opportunity, and it's not being funded, like at least in this sort of iteration, but it could conceivably keep on going. Do you think that is the case also for actually the LRO? I mean, could it conceivably keep going through the next calendar year as well, through the next fiscal year as well, or is it definitely done this coming year?
Yes, sir. It's in the same situation as opportunity. In the FY2015 request, we actually did not request funds for LRO. And so this is a continued operations, and yet we are in the process of identifying and have identified funding that continues support for LRO through FY2015. But it is true in the 16 request, it assumes no funding for LRO, and it'll be in the same situation as at some point this summer. We'll look at its operations and continue to and identify whether we will be able to continue its operations in 16. Same situation.
Irene Klotz with Reuters, your line is open.
Hi, thanks very much. I have a couple questions. The first is about the commercial crew figures. In the past, of course, NASA has not been successful in getting the amounts requested from Congress. What would be the implications to the program if that 50% funding increase is pared back by several hundreds of millions? And then also I had a question about the Europa. I believe Congress in 2015 put $100 million in for the program, and I think you said it was funded at 30, if memory serves, for the 2016 fiscal year. If you could just explain that, and if there's any kind of overall figure for that program development. Thanks.
On your first question on commercial crew, I'll reiterate again, I don't have each individual milestone and what they cost, et cetera. But if Congress does not fund the $1.244 billion, milestones that are planned for SpaceX and Boeing we cannot fund them. And therefore, we will have to renegotiate those contracts and move those milestones outside of FY16 into FY17 and beyond. And as a result, we will not be able to certify those services, the development of those services, by the end of 2017. That's the outcome. For Europa, you are correct. Our request is $30 million in FY16 for Europa formulation. The Congress did provide $100 million for Europa in 2015. Those dollars go towards the formulation of Europa. We have studies that we need to do, pre-work that we can do on instrument studies, et cetera, that move us towards preliminary design review and then ultimately a commitment to a Europa mission in the coming years. And once we get to that commitment, we will have an overall funding level for the Europa mission. I mean, I have seen in prior incarnations dollars thrown out that a Europa mission would be $4 billion, et cetera. We are looking at design concepts and ideas that meet the science intent of the decadal Europa at much lower cost than the $4 billion. I don't know what that number is. The moment I give you a number, that will become the real number, so I'm not going to give you one right now. But essentially, we are looking for a Europa mission that is not as expensive as was laid out in the decadal mission.
Keith Cowing, NASAWatch.com. Your line is open.
Yeah, I just a question I want to revisit, if I could, the Opportunity Odyssey LRO thing. And you guys kind of do this every year where you pick a couple little missions and you zero them out and everybody starts screaming and you always put them back. So I was wondering if there's a strategic reason why you do this when these spacecraft still have value. But the more important question I have as a follow-up is, are you limited still to only NASA taxpayer-provided dollars for the extension of these missions? Or are you now, because of something that happened last year, looking at other ways to fund these spacecraft?
Hey, Keith, in answer to your first question, it is not unusual for operating activities that are well beyond their meeting their science goals and missions and are extended operations to look at other ways that we can bring the cost down or not fund them in the out years. And then as time goes by, if we're able to fund them, we do, if the science makes sense. What you're looking at is any tension you have in any activity that has operations and development. You have to make trades between funding new activities and new development missions that bring new cutting-edge science versus taking advantage of something that's operating well and also providing good science. You have to make those trades. So whether we will continue that modus operandi of some of these lower cost operating missions going forward, of zeroing them out and then finding funding for them in the future, I don't know. But it's a reflection over trying to balance development versus future operations. Related to that, you talked about looking for new operating models that could somebody else, university, a private entity, et cetera, operate these missions. What we recently did for the activity that you were involved in was a new model, I think, in many ways. I'm not saying that today we are looking at those type of options or models for an LRO or an opportunity going forward, but at the same time, the agency, I think, is open for new ways. When, from an agency standpoint, we no longer have a science requirement to keep them operating. If somebody out there does want to provide funding and bring to the table and continued operators, we might consider that. I'm not guaranteeing that we would do it, but we would consider it. Did I answer your questions, Keith? Oh, he's gone.
Frank Mooring, your line is open.
thank you for taking these questions. I have two. I guess they're unrelated. One has to do with the transition in funding for commercial crew from development to operations. I wonder if you have any sort of notional figures in those space station out years for commercial crew operations, and also whether that would include any additions to the Soyuz contract, since the administrator said the last time he talked about this that there would continue to be mixed crews across all three vehicles that will be available. And then unrelated, I think you said that the concept review for the ARM options is going to slip into March. So does that mean we're going to get some kind of option readout in the next month or so before that review? I think that's it. Thanks.
Okay. In terms of the breakout of and station cargo crew and services, I don't have that. We'll have to work with our human exploration and operations folks to identify if there is a breakout in the out years. That's a fluid budget line in terms of when we need additional Soyuz flights, and if the services, if the companies Boeing and SpaceX meet their milestones and those services are definitely assumed in those out years. So I'm just going to take that one for the record and have HEO provide that, since I just don't have that in front of me. And the second one was, somebody remind me.
You're going to follow on the ARM mission A or B.
Oh, yes, the ARM mission A or B. So I'm not able at this point to tell you when we will make that selection and announce it. I'm not able to tell you whether that will be before MCR or as part of MCR or later. But I will say it will definitely be sometime this spring. It could be, it could be happening soon, within the next few days. It could be happening at MCR. It could be happening later. So I just don't have a time for you when we will announce that down select of that option. But we continue to move forward in identifying the extensibility of those options, as well as how they meet our formulation of our budgets, and moving towards a selection in 2016 of a design concept. That help?
Marcia Smith, spacepolicyonline.com. Your line is open.
Thank you so much. Dave, could you talk about how much of the increase for Earth Sciences is because of the transfer of responsibilities from NOAA?
It's a wonderful question, Marcia. I'm not sure I can break that out. Let me try a second here. I'm not. The issue I have is I don't actually not sure that our budget breaks it out to that level of detail, and we'll have to get that for you for the record. I do not have that in my materials here, and we will provide that to you as a follow-up.
Jeff Faust, Space News, your line is open.
For the asteroid initiative, $220 million overall. Besides the $50 million for NEO searches and $69 million for solar electric propulsion, where is the remainder of that funding plan to go in 2016?
Okay, the 2016 request, and again, it's not $220 million for the actual mission. It's $220 million for the overall asteroid initiative, which includes the asteroid mission. And so let me break this out for you. Those activities where we are leveraging ongoing NASA activities and activities that are required to go forward, whether we do ARM or not, is $69 million within space technology for solar electric propulsion, $50 million within science for near-Earth object observations, and within HEO, Human Exploration Operations, there's $56 million related to EVA and suits activities, as well as a portion of in-space robotic servicing that could be applicable to a robotic mission. And then finally, there is $7 million in 16 in space technology that is supported by the Office of Chief Technologist related to Asteroid Grand Challenge. And finally, there is $38 million within AES in human exploration and operations that goes towards formulation of the asteroid redirect mission itself.
Ann Kim, HU Roll Call. Your line is open.
Hi, Ann Kim from CQ Roll Call. I have two questions for you. One regarding the Exploration Systems Development account, the one that contains funding for Orion, SLS, and ground systems. I see that it's significantly less than the 2015 enacted level. It looks like $382 million. Can you talk about why it's that lower level of proposed funding? And also, I was wondering if you could just briefly note again what projects you are taking on from NOAA within Earth Sciences.
Okay, in terms of the exploration systems development, as I noted earlier, is a reduction from FY2015 enacted, as you said. The dollars that we are requesting for 16 for Orion exploration ground systems, as well as SLS, are consistent with what we have requested in the 15 budget and assumed for FY16. They're consistent with our external commitment that we've laid out for SLS and Orion, which support a readiness for EM1 in November 2018. So what I'm saying is why the reduction is we actually are requesting funding that is necessary to meet the commitment that we have laid out, as well as the funding profile that we had laid out in prior budgets. And we are appreciative of the additional dollars that we did get from Congress, and has allowed us to reduce the risk that we do have in those programs to meet some challenges, as well as fund some long-term items. However, the request in 16 supports readiness for November 2018 for EM1, readiness for SLS and exploration ground systems. For the NOAA question, let me pull up that chart. We have a couple items going forward that will be, and they're not necessarily things that are direct items. The one direct item is TSIS-1, which is known as the Total and Spectral Solar Irradiance Sensor. This is something that's going to be flown to space station and put on space station to take observations from station. That had been in the NOAA budget. In 16, completion of TSIS is assumed in NASA's budget. We also assume that future ocean altimetry missions after JASON-3, and JASON-3 is funded within NOAA. So anything that follows on from JASON-3 related to ocean altimetry would be funded within NASA and no longer funded within NOAA. There are other activities going forward, such as Earth radiation balance activities and instruments and ozone profile information that had been funded within NOAA. Those will also transfer to NASA beginning in FY16. And that's it.
James Dean, Florida Today. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you, David. I had a couple of questions. First, you've noted how the request for exploration systems matches exactly what you had put in the FY2015 request, but the commercial crew request for next year is substantially higher. So I'm trying to understand, looking back a year, what is the difference between the sort of 870 or whatever million you notionally requested back then, thought you would request, and the much higher number this year. And then separately, when you talk about keeping exploration systems ready for November of 2018, we should assume that means still at the 70% confidence level, or does that confidence change based on this funding profile? Thank you.
Okay, on your first question for commercial crew, what has changed is we had proposals in hand and we selected 2 contracts to provide development and future services. That has changed. And so based on the selection of 2 providers and their proposals they laid out for providing capability and services by 2017, the increased number for commercial crew reflects having proposals and selections in hand. And that's why there's a difference in the 16 number for commercial crew. And the second one on the confidence levels, nothing has changed for that. The budget request assumes that SLS is ready November 2018 at 70% confidence. For exploration ground systems, actually when we made the commitment for November 2018 for exploration ground systems, the commitment was at the 80% level. And this request, as well as the assumed out-year funding for these activities, does not change that percent confidence.
There are no further questions coming from the queue.
Okay, that being the case, I just want to remind people, again, this is Alan Butel with the Office of Communications. We've got a couple questions for the record, and again, if you have additional ones, feel free to email us, and we'll do our best to answer them as you go through the budget charts in the coming days. As a reminder, we'll have a replay of this teleconference in about an hour or so. It'll be available for a month. You can call toll-free 888-562-4432. That's 888-562-4432 for a replay of this teleconference and for the next month to go over anything you may have missed. Thank you for joining us. Again, remember, all of our budget information is on www.nasa.gov/budget. Thanks.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.